They might not see the connection that their mood or their highs and lows of their ability to regulate transitions and whatnot are related to inconsistent sleep patterns and inconsistent nasal breathing patterns because they're not getting the rest that they have. And so it's not always obvious and right in front of us. And what I want to share is the good news.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, but here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, so let's get started.
What if you could avoid several developmental complications that last several years simply by omitting one baby gadget? So after 35 years of this particular gadget being on the market, we have learned a lot. And mostly, in my best opinion, it's negative, or at least it's risky that we don't have to go there and then deal with problems that don't serve your baby, your toddler, or your family. So what's the gadget? I'm talking about a sippy cup. And yes, there's a lot of debate out there, and moms, dads, professionals all have their own opinion. So I want to share mine, helping you organize the information after 35 years of being in the middle of it, both in my practice, and it just so happens that I was there when the sippy cup was invented, not personally, but in that generation. So it does seem innocent enough. I get it. And doctors are now having to weigh in, but they unfortunately don't understand a lot of the oral motor development that we end up being concerned with. And so they seem to always walk in the middle and say, in moderation, which then leaves the parent kind of in this pickle. What the heck does moderation mean? I think almost in every modality that in moderation, and I use air quotes there, can be very misleading, right? It happens in our diet, in our exercise, how much sleep. What the heck does moderation mean? Because how it serves one person, it doesn't serve another. So we have to be mindful. And what is my word for this year? Intentional. So let me lay out my 5 top reasons that I have concerns with the use of a sippy cup. The good news is, because us humans are very inventive and creative, and we're always looking for better or upgraded versions, after 35 years, you mom, you dad, have choices. And I just want to point those choices out. They're much healthier, much more effective, and lowers any possible risk on the side. I'm going to cover 5 key facts of why you should avoid using a sippy cup. And remember what our long-term goal is. You want your toddler to grow into that preschooler, that first grader, that second grader who is happy and healthy and highly communicative, right? Or at least that he has power to communicate easily and competently, that he's a healthy eater, a good sleeper, that he has good attention, that she has good engagement and mood regulation and self-control and curiosity. All of these things are built within those first 3, 5, 6 years, and they are stepping stones. But if we take the easy way out, then it doesn't always serve us. And so that's what I'm here for, is to really prevent unnecessary complications. Today, I want you to ask yourself, what can you do to prevent delays or prevent these risks? How can you be more proactive, right? Intentional, like I said. So let's walk through these. So no matter where you are on this journey, I assure you that you'll find benefits for all of this information because it focuses in on oral motor, speaking, eating, swallowing, and then it leads into other healthy, quote unquote, habits, right? So don't get me wrong. There are a lot of different nuances to you making parental choices. I get that. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it is what I have identified as the top 5 big ones. So number 1 is accidents. And you're thinking, really? What's that all about? Well, the Journal of Pediatrics report that every 4 hours, a child under the age of 3 is treated in the ER for an injury caused by a bottle, pacifier, or a sippy cup. And so I think what the newest number is like 2,200 unnecessary accidents a year. And it's because kids easily get into the habit of carrying those sippy cups around with them. And the unfortunate thing, the timing of it all, is that they're just learning to walk. They're new, mobile runners and walkers and climbers. And if you have something in your hand or worse, in your mouth, it throws your whole balance off. And when you fall, it's really, really hard. So there are a ton of reports with lacerations on the lips and bruising of the gums, chipping and breaking of the teeth. And that's just simply unnecessary. It's one more thing that you might have to worry about. And we all baby-proof our houses. So let's make sure, and I get this, that we will often feel like, oh, well, he'll drink and then put it down. That's not what happens because life is busy. Life with a toddler, as you well know, is messy and active and always moving in different directions. And it's hard to manage. And so I want to help you design routines, a lifestyle around this that helps them developmentally, but also eases the rhythm of your daily life. So just keep that in mind. Avoid unnecessary accidents, especially with a new walker, right? Let's put that 1-to-1 together. Number 2, and this kind of bleeds from that accident profile, that we create bad habits. Like I said, we're busy, we're on the go. Life is moving and shaking and changing. And so I know that you're imagining that your toddler can learn how to be a good eater, right? That he sits at the table, that he shares meals, that he's eager to eat with you, that life is relatively peaceful during meal times, that's your big imagination, right? You can dream big and it's very, very doable. It's very plausible. But carrying a sippy cup during all waking hours does not support, it really does interfere, good, healthy eating and drinking habits at the table. And remember, that's our goal. So at 6 months, we introduce solids and we're showing them what we do when we sit down at the table and what this food means. And then we can teach them appropriately at 6, 8, 10 months how to use open cups and straws. That's much more healthier and successful if we give them that chance to learn how to do that. And we do that by sitting, he or she is sitting in their high chair and they have good body positioning, right? And I've talked in other episodes about the importance of 90/4, which means there's 90 degrees at their hips when they're sitting in an appropriate sized chair, 90 degrees at the knees, 90 degrees at their ankles, so their feet are supporting their body posture. They're building their strength and coordination, and there's 90 degrees at their jaw and neck. And so we want them to be able to pick up the food and put it in their mouth and only think about eating and chewing and swallowing and not having to walk around or to sit in an uncomfortable chair or to sit on mommy's lap. All of those don't serve the development of the motor planning and organization and the cognitive understanding of how I do this thing called eating and drinking. And so if we create these bad habits, and I've talked before about how do you avoid creating a grazer and a child that just eats on the fly? How do you avoid picky eating? All of these things feed into this, no pun intended. But it's really important that if they're just eating and drinking 24/7 or whenever they feel like it, then that doesn't help build that internal system and good, healthy habits. So when you think about introducing solid foods at 6 months, I want you to also to include in that, and I don't always point this out explicitly, but I am now, that's the time is to introduce open cup drinking. And down below, I'm going to have a link to a company called Talk Tools that I highly recommend. They have an introduction cup, and in my opinion, a true introduction, and it's called Cutout Cup, as it has this notch cut out for his nose. So if you can think like you have a circular rim, but there's this notch which allows easy placement on the lips. These flexible cups are an improved design over time, as always, right? We get better and better through experiment, and it really helps stimulate the lips and the cheeks, which then allows the drinker, your child, to drink without a head or neck extension. And that's the problem with these 360 Munchkin cups. And that's a whole nother story, but I don't recommend those either, because we've learned over time watching kids use those 360 cups that they tip their head back and extend it. And that's not a good drinking posture. So this cutout cup, this has this generous open design, which allows you, mama, to easily view the lips and the tongue movement. They're colored cups, but you can still see through them, right? They're kind of opaque. And it's really a remarkable cup that has gotten better over time. I can attest to that because I remember, back in the mid 90s when they first were designed, that I used them in therapy, and I would just loan them to parents to practice at home, because it really is designed as an introduction. You wouldn't stay there with these cutout cups. You want to transition them after a few weeks to a real open cup that is small enough that they can handle it, but you want them to get the experience with sipping liquids out of this interesting thing that they have in their hand, right? Over time. They come in 3 different sizes and is really, really easy for them to manage and you to support that. But the idea is when you start to introduce solids appropriately through baby-led weaning methods, then it's also important to introduce the whole drinking need, right? And I know it's been kind of driven in our head that, a sippy cup is just a transition cup. It's just something in helping them transition off the bottle or the breast. And that's simply not true at all. It's not necessary. It's another layer that we modern inventors here have thrown into the mix. Remember what your dream is, to have them share meals with you and sit at the table and have good manners, and that then you can go out to restaurants and friends and relatives and not worry that they're going to disrupt the whole social eating community, and because that's an important part of our lifestyle. So there are good and bad aspects to all of this child rearing, and you get to pick what kind of future you want. And I'm just helping you understand, if you choose certain things here early on at 6 months and 12 months and 18 months, then that will help you color in that glorious future that you see. So number 3 is really what pediatricians and dentists talk about, because using a sippy cup throughout the day, whenever they feel like it, can really lead to dental problems. So the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry actually state that you shouldn't use it for a, quote, long period of time, that it should not act like a bottle or a pacifier. And again, that whole moderation term gets a little dicey. So we have to be really intentional and cautious of what are we going to do, when, where, and how. It often, the sippy cup, will then develop into a pacifier or a bottle, and they will then begin to rely on it. And that's part of that bad habit, is that it really becomes a security object and not a tool for drinking water when you're thirsty. You don't want your child walking around with a spoon in his mouth just in case he's hungry and he wants to take, a scoop of food. You don't want him to walk around with a sippy cup. And we'll talk about how it's evolved into this everyday tool that we think is automatically needed. So dentists recognize that both milk and juice contain sugar that coat the teeth, especially when they're put into a sippy cup. And that, unfortunately, then leads to tooth decay, which is their primary concern, the dentist. And I've seen a lot of tooth decay and what we call bottle rot or sippy cup rot. And that's just, again, another complicated factor that you'll have to deal with. It's not the end of the world per se, but it's not a healthy thing to deal with. And it's easily avoided. And I truly respect what the dentists are saying, because, it's another piece to the puzzle that help support giving better instruction to new parents, right? You guys are given this beautiful baby and you're like, uh-oh, it doesn't come with a manual. What do I do? And I really respect the dentists and the pediatricians who are trying to hone in here and say, it's not good for the health of the teeth. But I think there are other nuances to what are we putting in the sippy cup. And I think if you're sitting here listening to this and saying, well, I'm already using a sippy cup, if I can change your mind in one thing, that would be do not put milk or juice in a sippy cup. And the truth is, no child in the whole wide world should actually be drinking juice. And, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on in this episode, but we can also talk about the pros and cons with or having our children drink cow's milk as well. And the American Academy of Pediatrics advise parents to discontinue the bottle and move straight into an open cup drinking by the age of 18 months. So how I lay out my recommendations is that a bottle should be for nutrients, just like a mother's breast, right? It's to give the nutritious calories and vitamins and minerals. And that cups should be used for water. That's it. Right? It shouldn't Kids should not be drinking their nutrients once they're weaned off the bottle and or breast. And, the ideal target would be 12 months with the bottle, right? To wean them off the bottle. If you're choosing to continue with breastfeeding, I think that's absolutely fine. Not only because mother's milk is ideal nutrients, but it's also part of that bonding and that connection and that love. And I think up to about 18 months is lovely, especially because our world is a little crazy and busy and active, and nursing can really help settle our babies, our new toddlers. So look at it that way, that juice, any kind of juice, even if it's organic or this or that, is just, 3, 4, sometimes 5 teaspoons of sugar. It is unnecessary, and I cannot overstress this. In my mind, it's just one of the unhealthiest habits the human race has developed. If you want apple juice, eat the apple. If you want strawberries or berries of any kind, eat the fresh fruit. Help them chew, help them build their sensory awareness. But gulping down juice is just consuming sugar. And most of the juices have added sugar or added apple juice, because that's a cheap component that you can put in. And it interferes with their hunger regulation, and it spikes their glucose. And so it is not necessary, not healthy, and another bad habit to get into. Or better yet, avoid altogether. As a toddler, as a young teenager, and as an adult. So if you have juice in your house, just throw it out. I know it's a waste, but it is that important. All right. So here's my challenge for you. If we, as therapists and early interventionists, can easily teach a 6, 8, 10-month-old baby to drink from an open cup, and when I say easy, it just means that we have to be there. We have to show them how it's done, and it will take weeks and months, but you'll see improvement almost right away. And yes, there are going to be messes, but then that goes back to saying, okay, well, if I only put water in all the cups, then the mess is just going to be water, and that's not a big deal. And I'm going to share down in the description, but in my outline here, I have notes on what other options. So let's just take a quick look. Where the heck did these sippy cups come from? And I said in the beginning, they've been around for about 35 years, right when I was finishing my graduate work. And, when I started working with families and they'd come in with these sippy cups. But what it was an engineering dad. I think he was from Southern California, and that's where I was. And he was just tired of cleaning up the backseat of his car, and he was tired of cleaning up his rugs in his home. And he was a smart dude, and he certainly understood how to get liquid in your baby without messes, but he didn't understand oral motor development. He didn't understand the connection between early speech and language, talking and chewing and swallowing, and how they all interrelate. He just wanted a clean house and his clean car, and I get that. And in my industry, we kind of joke about him quite a bit. But what happened was he started making them and selling them to friends and his local school community and all of this. And then in the early 1990s, about 10 years in, he sold his patent to Playtex. And then everything is history. I mean, you know what happened, right? The commercial industry educated us, you, innocent mom and innocent dad, saying, yeah, I don't want messes either. And look, my new child is independently drinking water, hopefully. But no, what we put in, because they're still quite young, is milk. And cow's milk is not necessary for any toddler. And we can talk about the pros and cons to that. But we now have 35 years of what the side effects are to using the sippy cup, and how easy it is to create bad habits, and how easy it is for it to become their pseudo pacifier, and then is extended not for weeks like it was originally thought of, but for months and years. So we can make a healthier decision, avoid accidents, like I mentioned, avoid bad habits, avoid dental rot. And I know it's not always easy to embrace these decisions. And it's not necessarily looking at it saying, oh, this is easy. Yeah, I like cleaning up spilt water. But if we put in the work now, then a couple months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, he will understand, oh, I'm thirsty. Let me go get some water. I'm going to stop here, drink some water, sit down. If you have a 2-year-old, then he can say, Mom, I'm thirsty. And you say, great. Here's your cup, your open cup, or here's a straw. Sit down, have a drink, relax for a moment, and then go and continue to play. You don't do it on the fly. And when we're busy and active, then you have those spill-proof straw cups that you can put in the back of the car. That's easy. And we'll talk about why are all of us, not just our kids, but it just so happened that at the same time that the sippy cup was introduced in the early 90s, that was when the single bottle drinking of water was introduced. And I did a little deep dive onto that because I find that fascinating. I think, you see these things coming together and then they feed off of each other. Somebody produces a product and educates us that we need that product. And then we're convinced it's just a way of life. But I want to now dive into number 4, because we talked about, the first 3, right? There's accidents, bad habits, dental rot. And number 4 is the swallowing issues. And this whole sippy cup and its design, engineering dad, who doesn't understand the oral motor skills, but it really goes against everything that you're striving to do with your brand new toddler, that 1-year-old and that 1.5-year-old. But also even at 6 months, when you're introducing solid foods and you're introducing how to quote unquote drink, not from a bottle, not from a breast, but from a quote unquote cup, then you want to set them up for success. So most parents, due to the advertising, believe that a sippy cup is a big natural milestone, and that from moving from the bottle or the breast into the sippy cup is a huge progression. And it's not. If we look at the motor planning, what's necessary from drinking from a sippy cup, it's no different than when your child drinks from a bottle nipple. It's the exact same way to get liquid down his throat. And there's a whole different motor planning and motor coordination between a bottle nipple and a breast. And we know this. We've never been able to really design the ideal bottle nipple that works like a breast, because that's Mother Nature. That's how God designed us, and is really quite beautiful. And the development of the motor skills there between those two modes of eating for your newborn and your baby are quite different. But if we just use the bottle for 6 months or 10 months or 12 months or 14 months, then introducing solid foods and drinking from a cup appropriate, and good speech and good singing and good motor skills and all of these things, then we can mitigate any bad swallow or bad sucking habit that you've created in that first 10 or 12 months. I hope that makes sense. And so when we look at a baby who is bottled fed, that the musculature is moving and strengthening differently than breastfed babies. And so it's this unnatural force and the jaw is pulled backwards. And that's that kind of sucking motion. While babies breastfeed, the jaws actually grow forward due to a more natural pressure balance while they're extracting. And there's videotapes on this, and it's quite remarkable to see the different postures and movement patterns during these. But again, if you end up, you can't breastfeed or you stop breastfeeding at 6 months, that's what I did, and we switched to a bottle. But at the same time, we were introducing cup drinking and straw drinking. And so as we slowly changed her diet by her 12th month, then we were able to really wean off the bottle because she was getting plenty of nutrition through her solid food eating, right? And then she was drinking water from a cup. I think most of us are pretty knowledgeable with the benefits of breastfeeding, right? That it's pretty common knowledge that the nutrients are just simply remarkable, that it lowers ear infections and respiratory problems. It reduces the chance of reflux or gastrointestinal problems. And breastfeeding seems to have a positive effect on reducing the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. So there's a wealth of knowledge and research and data to support all of that. What isn't as common, I think, especially with new parents and new families, are the pros and cons with the oral motor benefits of breastfeeding versus bottle feeding. And like I said, we just simply haven't been able to duplicate, God's creation of the breast. And that makes sense. And so we, again, go into this with some purposeful intention, right? Some planning and understanding where are the cutoffs and what are the pros and cons, and to be open to have some wiggle room with this, right? Ideally, yes, at 12 months, we'll have introduced enough healthy, nutrient-dense foods that she or he, my precious little baby, my 1-year-old, will no longer need a bottle to be nourished with, right? And that does not mean that then you give cow's milk in a cup. That is a myth as well. And pediatricians more and more are saying that we don't have to do that. That if you are smart in the kitchen, then the cow's milk isn't necessary. Now you can give dairy with cheeses and plain high-fat yogurt. That's what your babies need, not the sugar one. And I'll talk a little bit, I think later on in my notes, I outline pros and cons to cow's milk. But for this purpose right here, when we're starting to choose the different methods that we're going to help our baby develop these skills, and swallowing is really, really important because it's not just to swallow the food or the drink or even your own saliva. That's that motor planning that is exercised throughout waking and sleeping hours. We as humans will swallow just our own saliva 2,000 times a day. And every time we put pressure on either our teeth or the roof of the mouth, that's 5 pounds of pressure per swallow, then we're shaping the oral structures, right? Their hard palate, their teeth, how the upper jaw and the lower jaw fit together, how the jaw is aligned at rest. All of these are really vital to speech, to eating, to breathing, to sleeping, to mood, to health. It's this domino effect I'm always sharing with you. But I just wanted step in here and take note that the swallow pattern is different with a bottle nipple and a breast. And if we're moving toward a mature swallow, we even want to move beyond that breast too, right? We want them to be able to be at rest and take in food or take in liquid or even swallow our own saliva with a mature swallow pattern. Sippy cups, unfortunately, reinforce an immature sucking pattern. It's very similar to what your baby will do with a bottle. And that is why pediatricians and dentists are calling it a transition period, or it shouldn't move beyond this training period. And I say you don't need this transition period. That just like the pacifier, and I've talked about this in previous episodes, you use the pacifier to pacify, right? To help them transition to sleep, and then you remove it. And that is a very strategic tool, and that can be highly beneficial, but then you have to have an exit plan. Here, what I'm saying is a sippy cup, you don't even need it because it's counterproductive. There's a forward motion, right? The tongue is moving forward, it protrudes out, and even a slight protrusion of the tongue against your teeth, right? If you think about, is very similar to if you put your thumb in your mouth, right? That's that hard spout for the sippy cup. And it literally interferes with the contact of the tongue and the hard palate. So now the opposite would be an open cup or the use of a straw during drinking, which reinforces what we want as the more mature swallow pattern. It really promotes it. And then it's really because the lips are leading when it forms a seal on the straw or the rim of the cup. And it gives them that exercise, that oral motor exercise to isolate, or what we call disassociate, the lips from the cheek and the tongue. And so now you're getting these fine motor planning movements with great success. So what we want is the tip of the tongue to elevate behind the top teeth, which are those bumps if you run the tip of your tongue up there. And then it will push against that, and the liquid will then go back for the swallow. So even if your baby doesn't have teeth up there yet, at 6 months, when you're beginning to introduce a cup or a straw, the tip of their tongue will start to go up there right on the gum line and be able to have that wave-like motion to swallow down the liquid or swallow the food. So just keep in mind that hard spout really interferes with proper motor planning and exercise. And when your baby's out and about during waking hours and talking or playing or singing or eating or chewing or swallowing his or her own spit, that's all exercise. That's growth and development. That's why everything that we do with them, even if they're playing on their own, they're wiring their system. You're giving them that opportunity to develop strength and coordination and regulation and alignment and all of these things. So number 5 of my list of top concerns with sippy cups is that, lo and behold, it will interfere with speech. And I continually stress, and I'm sure I've mentioned just a few minutes ago, how eating, drinking, swallowing, and speech are all interconnected, that it's an oral motor system, and we're building these patterns. And so I know at this point you're probably thinking, well, will all kids who use sippy cups have speech issues? And that's a simple no. I'm sure you know kids that use sippy cups and don't have speech issues or don't have eating issues or don't have chewing and swallowing issues. And that's great if they don't, and you're blessed. But I can share that good oral motor skills are necessary for good speech development, and that good oral motor skills are necessary for good eating habits. And so if we know how those are interrelated, then why go there? Why throw another layer to this complicated mess that we live in, right, in this modern world? We have a lot of beautiful advances that have helped us live an easier life, but sometimes using these tools or make it easier in the immediate now, but harder in the long run. So if your child has poor or even just mildly weak oral motor control, which would include like lip closure, the tongue elevation onto the roof of the mouth, the mature swallow pattern, then in turn, speech sounds and imitating words can be compromised, can be delayed or slowed, or worse yet, kind of turn into this mumble, right? This inaccurate production. We have very, very small motor planning to say the t, 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 or the g, g, g. All of those individual sounds, the tip of the tongue and the back of the tongue. And they move really, really quickly. And in order to get good practice in that, then we need to strengthen it wherever and however we can go. This is why one of the first things a good speech therapist or any speech therapist worth her salt will discuss how they're using a cup or a straw. And if they are using a sippy cup, how much and when and where and how and what goes in it. So that's a really, really important factor for all of these reasons, right? It reduces risk. It helps me understand, are they using it as a bad habit and a pacifier? What's the health of their teeth? What's the swallow? Because that leads into speech production as well. My number one goal with this podcast is to help you, mom, understand how to prevent issues that aren't necessary or layers that make it more complicated. My hope is that you're gaining information here to help you set the stage for success, to alleviate your challenges and your toddler's challenges. To avoid these unnecessary problems, you have to make some hard choices. And other moms, friends and family, and even professionals might say to you, that's hogwash. My kid used sippy cups and didn't have any problem. Well, God bless him. He didn't have any problems. That's great. And I'm just saying, you have a choice. And if I could remove things that just were unnecessary, this is one of them, right? Just like I would be much more mindful about how you use a pacifier and more mindful about what food choices I give my brand new 6, 8, 10, 12-month-old, right? Do I want highly processed food or do I want him to fall in love with nature, right? Healthy plants and delicious meat that is one ingredient. You have these choices right here and right now to make that. And when I do hear parents or see it on social media or read an article that they didn't have any problems with their child and using a sippy cup, and I wonder, they might not see how it's connected with a picky eater. They might not see how the recurrent ear infections, colds, or congestions are related to what they put in that sippy cup. They might not see how their bad sleeping and snoring is related to the fact that their oral musculature is weak. It might not be severe, but it's weak enough that they sleep and rest with their mouth open, that they've become a mouth breather, not a nasal breather. They might not see the connection that their mood or their highs and lows of their ability to regulate transitions and whatnot are related to inconsistent sleep patterns and inconsistent nasal breathing patterns because they're not getting the rest that they have. And so it's not always obvious and right in front of us. And what I want to share is the good news. Here's the good news. Since the invention of the original sippy cup way back in the 80s and 90s, like I shared, we've come a long way. We've learned through research and technology the pros and cons. We've also developed alternatives that you don't have to go there. And so I have a friend and a colleague who's semi-retired now, but she was coming of age. She's a little bit older than I am, back in the late 80s, early 90s, and her name is Sarah Rosenfeld Johnson. But she founded a company called Talk Tools, and I mentioned this earlier in this episode, and I'll have the links down below. And I've been sending clients there to her website and to her company because she's developed tools that we can help in therapy, right? When someone has severe oral motor problems for lots of different reasons. But she's also developed alternative cups or cups that will help in this transition. And when I talk about transition, I'm talking about a month. It takes about a month to really teach your baby how to drink from an open cup. And so she has, as I said earlier, these cutout cups that you can get three different sizes for about $12. They're lightweight. Your baby can easily manage them once you're helping them, right? And then you slowly but surely remove your hand or your support, and they can manage the cups. She also has cups with handles, and that's helpful. She has a cup that's called a honey bear with a straw. It's very cute. I've used it. I probably have had 200 of them in my career. But it's a great way to teach kids how to use the straw because you can squeeze the bear a little bit. And so you can help them be successful right off the bat. And they make that connection of, oh, if I put my lips around the straw and I suck a little bit, I get water. But there are a lot of great alternatives. As I said, a straw is always an excellent way to go. And yes, there are tools, and I think I'll have another episode specifically on open cup drinking and straw drinking because there's a little art to that, like all of this, right? It's an art and science of mothering and parenting and my speech and language. You know, my whole career is that appreciated diving deep into the science and learning the biology and the neurology and the development. But the flip side, there's a special knack to get these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds to do what we need them to do, right? There is that art and science together. And what I really, as a bonus, I just want to touch upon the nutrition. And I've mentioned it earlier as it fell under other concerns, especially with the tooth decay and all of this. But I want you to really think about the pros and cons about the food choices that we make for our babies and our toddlers and our children and ourselves, right? And I think that this is a golden opportunity for new moms and new families to say, here, I have this beautiful baby or this 1, 2, 3, 4-year-old who is just beginning to enter, life at large. And how can I serve him the best? By giving him the best, richest food. And then I have to, of course, look in the mirror and say, okay, what do I eat? How do I take care of my nutrition, my mental health, my cognitive health, my physical health, right? You're recovering from this new baby and you want to serve yourself well too. But a couple of ideas that I just want to share with you, especially as it's related to the sippy cup. And I mentioned this earlier. If I could wave a magic wand and take one thing away from families to help them, right? It would be no juice for anybody ever, and just put that whole product out of commission. There's no need. Like I said earlier, if you want the taste of an orange, go eat the whole orange, right? You have some chewing going on, you have some fiber, you'll eat one orange, but you won't eat the juice of 4 oranges that typically are poured in a glass, or the 3 to 7 teaspoons, depending on the type of orange juice. So the other piece, and pediatricians are kind of getting on this bandwagon, is that cow's milk isn't necessary. And again, it's just part of the advertisement that we've been conditioned to believe that, once they stop breastfeeding or bottle feeding, then we just pour cow's milk into a glass. And especially here in the United States, we're the only country that I'm aware of that drinks cow's milk from a glass beyond, age 2. And so it's important that you, again, recognize that you have choices, right? I can get yogurt and cheese. I can use those dairy to get all the nutrients that I'm looking for, protein and healthy fats and calcium and all of that. And so here are the takeaways: that any cup, whether you use a sippy cup or you use straw or an open cup, should only be water. And that walking around with a drink is unnecessary. And when I started to do some research for this particular topic, I found it very fascinating that it was like all of these things coming together, and it's a perfect storm. So you have the developer in the early 1990s with sippy cups, and then you have highly processed food production peak, again, starting in the 1990s, and everything was about these individual packages for your kids and all of this. And then you had in 1986, there was a big scandal about the lead that's in our tap water. So what happened, and again, this is when I was kind of coming of age, right? I was 25, 30 years of age, and I was building my practice, and I was right there in the heart of LA. And it was, quote unquote, a fashion statement to have these single water bottles, right? And so the two first companies were Perrier and Evian. And, Hollywood pushed this because there's lead in our tap water and we can't go there. But the interesting thing, and you can Google this, but the two first companies besides Perrier and Evian was that Pepsi made and still makes Aquafina. That was in 1994. And then the Coca-Cola made Dasani in 1999, I think, or 1990. Actually, they came out first. And those water bottles, I would never buy them, by the way, because they're just filtered tap water. And I have bought them because I was desperate on a road trip or something, and that's the only thing that the gas station had. But if you have a choice, when you have a choice, choose healthier versions, choose healthier. But I found it fascinating to look at the timeline where sippy cups were invented and processed foods spiked. And then we had these single-use water bottles, right? Out of plastic. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole that I don't want to go down, but there are pros and cons to that. But the other big piece, this is kind of my takeaway for you all, because it becomes this domino effect. And I talk a lot about domino effect here, but the big takeaway is that processed foods make us much thirstier, because you're saying, you, mom, if you're 25, 30, or 35, you grew up with water bottles, right? I didn't grow up with water bottles. I was a professional when water bottles came into vogue, right? But it's the highly processed foods that interfere with our sodium balance. So what happens when we eat packaged food, right? Whether they're cookies or chips or crackers or bread even, that because they have so much sodium, it draws out the water out of our tissues. And then our body needs external water. We need to drink water from the outside to stay hydrated and in balance, our cellular system, our water balance. And so then we're driven to drink more water. And you know this when you eat popcorn or you eat a whole bunch of chips, you drink water. Why do you think, I don't know if they do this anymore, but bars used to always give free peanuts away. Why? To make you thirsty, so you drink more. The other aspect to highly processed food, because it is so processed, right, that we need more water with it to actually digest it. So we have this imbalance because of the sodium and the dehydration internally. So we're needing or thinking we need more water. And so it becomes this big cluster, I think. I know that once I removed all processed foods, and it was in stages. I became keto and now ketovore, which just means that I lead with protein and, I have some vegetation on the backside and some healthy fats in the middle, but I eat nothing from a box or a bag anymore, nothing. And I used to. For a number of years, when I even went keto, I got all these alternative flours, right? I went gluten-free and then I just went completely wheat-free, but it's still highly processed. There's still extra sodium that our body doesn't really know what to do with. And so I'm sharing this kind of nugget so you can put it in perspective. And even if you test yourself for 1 week and say, okay, I'm not going to eat any processed food for 1 week, you see how you don't go to your water bottle as much. You don't drink nearly as much water. And, there's some controversy around 8 glasses of water a day or 8 to 10 glasses with some people. I have noticed that I drink a lot less water, even living here in Florida. So I just want you to have all of the information that you can make the decision. You can make a wise decision and you can sit on it for a while and look at it a month from now. Like I said before, that the domino effect with oral motor development, speech, and eating are so tightly interconnected, right? And that your goal is to have your baby and toddler develop efficient and effective, mature oral motor skills. And then they become healthy eaters and good drinkers, and the speech and the breathing serve him. So then he can continue to grow and learn and thrive. So keep that all in your heart when you're making these decisions and let me know what you think. Thank you again for spending your precious time with me. I truly look forward to future conversations with the pros and cons to all of these baby gadgets. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful spring and that you all had a lovely Easter. So God bless. Take care. See you next time.